All right. Well, it's episode 2, and apparently I was wrong in episode 1 already. Bound to happen, but you know, I have to say that I am so happy that Trump did what he did last night, and that they had the ceasefire in place. A lot of people I see are doing mocking, saying it was Taco Tuesday, and taco means Trump always chickens out. Be happy with this. All right. This is the best alternative. I mean, not starting the war to begin with was the best one, but once we got there, this was by far the best choice, the best thing that could have been done. So I'm very happy with that. Unfortunately, it seems like the ceasefire is already off. I mean, they opened the Strait of Hormuz last night for a few hours, and there was still some firing going back and forth, but everybody thought it was going to end. But as of this morning, the Strait of Hormuz is now closed. Iran is claiming that the US and Israel violated the ceasefire. And there's some contentions over what the ceasefire exactly was over. So, well, let's get into it and just talk about it was a 10-point plan for the ceasefire that Iran had proposed last week. Basically the same thing they said since the beginning of the war. But I'll just read them out. 1, U.S. commitment to ensure no further acts of aggression, continued Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, acceptance of Iran's nuclear enrichment rights, lifting all primary sanctions, lifting all secondary sanctions, termination of the United Nations Security Council resolutions against Iran, termination of all International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors resolutions against Iran, payment of damages to Iran for loss in the war, withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, cessation of hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon. That is the key one that we have to talk about. But, this was this wasn't the deal. This wasn't the ceasefire. This was just kind of like, all right, this is where we're going to start. So Iran is the one that placed the anchor. We had to talk from here. Let's see. Well, the main issue was, even after the announcement of the ceasefire for a few hours, there was strikes back and forth. A few of the Gulf states were hit overnight. I think UAE was hit pretty hard, maybe a little bit of Saudi Arabia. The oil refinery on the Lavon Island of Iran, which is like right off the coast, right by Qatar and Bahrain, that was hit fairly hard. Tel Aviv, every video I saw out of there was just raining down missiles on Tel Aviv. But the big one was Lebanon. Netanyahu's office came out a few hours, maybe 4 hours after the ceasefire, and said that Lebanon is not part of the deal. They've had an ongoing war there since March 16th. They invaded southern Lebanon. And then Trump came out and backed him up, said, yeah, Lebanon is not part of the deal. It's a separate thing. But that was always part of it. It was that all hostilities across the region needed to end. Well, let's kind of get into the Lebanese war right now. The Hezbollah shot rockets into Israel, at the beginning of this Iran war. I'm not sure what day exactly, but, the first few days of the war they shot. So then Israel launched an invasion of southern Lebanon. They have ordered everybody south of the Litani River, which is not too deep into Lebanon, but a significant portion of Lebanon. They ordered evacuation of everybody while they tried to clear out Hezbollah and all these sites where they were shooting rockets into Israel from. And when Israel goes into a place, they really don't care about the civilian population or anything like that. And unfortunately, there's some major casualties. Let me see. I think there's over 300 dead and 800 wounded. I'm right. One of note was Catholic priest in one of the Christian villages. Supposedly Hezbollah fighters were hiding out in. Well, the Catholic priest refused to leave his town and his church, and he said we were going to stay and protect the people. Well, Israel came in and fired a tank at one of the homes, destroying it, hurting people inside. I'm not sure if there were any initial deaths, but so the priest ran, and everybody else from the village ran over to help, see who was wounded, get them out of there. And Israel did a double tap, and they fired on the same home with all the people looking to help. And unfortunately, the priest was killed. And his name was Father Pierre El Rahi. And you can go on sure, TikTok or Instagram or wherever, and you can see his funeral, and it was touching. I mean, somewhat, because the entire village came out. I mean, they have a little bit of a weird for us, tradition, I guess, with funerals. I mean, they carried this man's coffin and dancing in the streets up and down, music playing. You see crowds of people crying, and it was touching, but definitely sad. You see the impact that he had on this village and all the lives that he touched, and people spoke about how he protected them and cared for them and settled disputes within the town. Like, he was the mediator within this town and everything, and he was just such a cornerstone of that community. And double tap from a tank is what took him out. That's nothing new for them. They double tap hospitals and shelters and everything. They've been doing it forever, but you saw videos of it nonstop in the recent Gaza war. There's about over 1.2 million people now have been displaced from southern Lebanon. They're just going into all these villages and towns and just clearing them out. Creating a refugee crisis, which that's the same MO over and over again. Is that they get pushed north and then eventually get pushed up into Europe and United States and all of that, and that seems to be the lasting impact of all these wars. There's one town in particular I saw a video of over the weekend, and it's Nakora. I'm not sure how to say it. Nakara, something. And there's videos from outside the town. It's right on the coast of the Mediterranean, like just on the other side of the Israeli border. And the idea set explosives all through this town and literally just demolished the entire village. Like, they set off the explosion and you watch them just go around the village and just all these buildings just come down. And they're doing that to a few places. They've done that too. That one was just happened to be the city that I saw. They did have a sort of an intervention with the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon. Israel did, where he called and asked specifically for Christian villages to be left alone, basically. Let them stay there, this and that. It seems like Israel has, for the most part, obliged. It's nice that the Christians are left, but you don't want to see anybody thrown out of their homes. And it's tragedy. Think about somebody coming into your neighborhood with tanks and mortars and this and that, saying you have to leave or you're going to die because we're blowing this place up. And that's what's happening in Lebanon right now. There was also a call to the Sunni villages that they would be left alone. Remember yesterday, it's the Shiites who Israel really has a problem with right now. So all the Sunni villages in Lebanon, they're saying, "Oh, you can stay, but don't let any outsiders, Shias, take refuge in your villages. If they come, any displaced Shiites come looking for shelter, looking to be, protected, you need to throw them out of your town and let them, fend for themselves." Now, when I read that, that was over the weekend as well as I read that. Well, I don't know if you can kind of hear the clicking in the background. That's Mago. He's chewing a bone. Say hi, Mago. So, when I read that, I couldn't place where exactly I heard like something like that before. But like it just had like a feeling, like it had to do with something about a girl, and I think she wrote a diary. I'm pretty sure I remember hearing about a little girl's diary where people were coming into all these villages and looking for her people, and those people were told not to shelter them under the threat of death. And I don't think we're supposed to let that happen again. Pretty sure there was a whole thing about never again. It could have been a show, though. Who knows? I can't tell you where I remember that from exactly, but you know, never again. Now moving to today, early this morning, they issued an evacuation order for the city of Tyre, which is another city on the coast of Lebanon, a little bit further north than that, Nakara. Yeah. It's sad and everything as it is. It does give me a little bit of a segue to go into what I really love, which is history, ancient history especially. And Tyre is the 12th oldest city on Earth. It's up there with, well, Jericho is the first, and it's up there with Jerusalem is very old. There's Babylon. There's a few in India that's as well. Thebes in Egypt. Anyway, the Tyrians were Phoenician people, they called them. And the Phoenicians were the absolute top of their class when it comes to navy and sailing, all of that. They actually, when Persia eventually conquered them, it was the Phoenician navy that they used to invade Greece. If anybody remembers the movie 300 or anything like that, that was the Phoenician navy. Persians are from Iran. They really don't have a navy. They're horsemen. But they established colonies all throughout the Mediterranean, going back to ancient times. The most famous one's probably Carthage, which is in modern day Tunisia. Actually, that's where Mago gets his name from. The most famous person from Carthage being Hannibal, crossed the Alps to invade Rome with elephants. Well, his brother was named, he had two, Mago. And that's kind of where I got his name from. Now, I love that period of history, most of all, probably. I mean, and Tyre also made reference to in the Bible countless times. They allied with David and Solomon, and then eventually they joined. They were part of I believe it's a list of 10 nations against Judah. Tyre was part of that. There was prophecies from Ezekiel about their destruction. It's just been one of those cities that's been around forever. They're so much of a coastal city, actually, that they actually had part of their city on an island. So, like, there was almost like a bridge that they built to connect this little tiny island that's right off the coast of the mainland city, and it was just as one. They used it for their military, the citadel, but later on, when Alexander the Great started his conquests, they were under Persian rule, and he started taking all the coastal cities. Tyre had retreated to this island and destroyed the bridge so that you can't get to them or anything. And Alexander had his soldiers just move dirt and earth and whatever slowly off the coast and literally built a bridge of dirt to this city. And then that's how he conquered Tyre. And that's, just one of those little fun stories from history that you don't know if it's really true. Anytime, anything like that back then, it's a crapshoot. What's true and what's not. There's no evidence, but it's such a cool story that I wanted to add it in there. And one last little fun fact: you know that purple is the color of royalty. That's what royalty wears. Kings, emperors, this and that. Started with the Roman Empire emperors. It's actually specifically Tyrian purple is the color because there's a snail that lives only in that region of Phoenicia, and they have to like boil this snail, and I'm not sure the process exactly, but that's how they get this exact purple color. So it's known as Tyrian purple. You know, back to more modern day type of things. It's just kind of more of the same. Hopefully this ceasefire does hold. It's hopefully it's just kind of posturing by Iran of reclosing the strait and us trying to put up a strong front that we have, but it's just more of the same of just our ally, our greatest ally, just dragging us into conflict after conflict and just creating hardships for us. Like, they're not an ally, they're a cancer. They need to be cut out and just fend for themselves. If they want to do these things, fine. But no money, no military backing, no intel. We have to cut them off because it does nothing but hurt us. We get blowback terrorism from what they do or what we do for them. I spoke last episode about the Al Qaeda member inspired by them. I think I said he was the mastermind, and that wasn't true. That's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but he was the head of the group of hijackers. So that they grabbed this certain division from Al Qaeda, and he was the head of that division. And he's the one who led them while they were in America for all their flight schools and this and that. His name was Muhammad Atta, and he joined after the Qana massacre. It's Qana in 1996. That's when he decided to join Al Qaeda. He was partly radicalized, but he was also, I think he was an engineering student. I'm not sure exactly what he was studying, something like that, in Germany at the time. So he was a smart guy, living in Germany, but he was inspired after, it was another invasion of Lebanon from Israel because, just, I guess said last time, it's Hezbollah, it's just the constant thorn in their side. So when they invaded, the UN had a shelter. They have them all over that area, for civilians to flee to in these times. And hopefully that they are left alone. It's, like back in medieval times, or like churches were a safe haven. If you fled to a church, they would raid, pillage, burn down the town, but everybody would leave the church alone. So that's sort of what the UN shelters were set up there for. And when I went back and read, it wasn't clear exactly when, but the couple of Hezbollah fighters fired some mortars at the IDF force that was in the area. And whether it was right before or right after, but this IDF called in. Now they didn't have any support in the area, so they said, "All right, we're gonna shoot mortars into this UN shelter," you know. And like I said, there was 2 Hezbollah guys there, but there were, over 800 civilians sheltering in this shelter, and they just rained hell down on them. There was 106 people killed, children, women, mostly, of course. I think one person I read, he lost 37 members of his family. And, talk about blowback terrorism. What would you do at that point? Would you say, "Oh, thank you for getting rid of the Hezbollah that was hiding in our village"? Or would you say, "You know what, I'm going to go join them. I'm going to go kill those people who killed 37 members of my family"? Yeah, it's not a matter of whether who started it, this and that. It's a matter of just being a human. And, kill all the terrorists you want. That's fine. But you're intentionally killing women and children to get a couple of terrorists, which I'm not even sure if they got them, to be honest. I didn't read either way, but that's their MO. It's that, where we would hope, and I do believe that the American military, kills civilians accidentally. Like, there are things that happen in war, and that's why I'm so against it. But there is going to be collateral damage no matter what, and every single one is a tragedy. And I hope that there is none, but I don't believe that the Americans would bomb through a human shield, basically. So if a couple of Al Qaeda guys were hiding in a building with 100 people, an apartment building, let's say, and a couple of Al Qaeda guys went in there, I don't believe that the American military would bomb that building, killing everybody just to get the 2. Whereas the IDF has no issue. There's hard to get confirmation, but everything you read that in Gaza there was a program called Daddy's Home, where they used AI for most of their targeting. Actually, there wasn't humans doing it anymore. So this AI would track the Hamas member or whoever back to when he got home, and that's when the strike would occur. So you're wiping out entire families intentionally. And it's just, what can you really say? I mean, they revel in the death. They want to ethnically cleanse all this area. That's what they're trying to do in Lebanon. Their first order was to ethnically cleanse everybody, get everybody out. And then they got enough pushback from the U.S. ambassador that, okay, we'll let the Christians stay. But this is what they want. They want to get rid of everybody. They want a Jewish state for only Jews. It's just the same type of stuff over and over. They've been dragging us into all these conflicts. Iran has been 2 weeks away from a nuke since the 90s. Netanyahu has been testifying at the UN, in Congress, on any news agency that will have him. Oh, Iran is 2 weeks away. We believe that he's 2 weeks. He's 3 weeks away. They're 3 weeks away. He went to the UN with a picture of a cartoon bomb like you'd see in Looney Tunes, like the circle with the little top and then the fuse on top. And he had it filled to 90%. He said, "Look, this is how close they are to a nuke." A clown. For 30 years, they were 2 weeks away from a nuke. And that's who we believed enough to go start this last war. He gave the speech in Congress for the Iraq war, and he said, "I believe that if you take Saddam out, democracy will sweep the region." No, it wouldn't. He knew it wouldn't. We knew it wouldn't. But that's what he was telling everybody. That's what he was trying to convince everybody of. I mean, again, I spoke about last time is, we're arming and funding these Sunni groups and ISIS, Al Qaeda. We partnered with them again. They're a friend again. We destroyed the nation of Libya, turned it into a hellhole, barely even a state with slave markets in the open. Syria, same thing. I mean, there's just every day you hear about a new massacre going on in Syria. Syria was a very diverse country. There's a lot of Christians there. There's a lot of Sunni. There's a lot of Shiite. There's a lot of Druze. And there's I can't remember the name, but Alawites. That's what it is, Alawites. And they're kind of like a branch off sect of Shiites, but kind of identify themselves differently. It's just their ISIS leader over there, who we had in the White House. His people are just going into all these villages and just laying down all these people and just executing them right there on the street. I mean, you can see video of it. You go on X and you go wherever, and you can get the videos of it, and it's terrible. How many times can you say tragedy? But again, it's just a daily tragedy that we aided in the beginning. Now Iran, there's I think over 1,200 dead there, something like that. You'd think that it would be mostly military and stuff like that, but the U.S. and Israel, I think it was Saturday, right before Easter, they bombed a synagogue in Tehran during Passover, which sounds counterintuitive, but Iran does actually have the second largest Jewish population of any Middle Eastern country. It's really not close to Israel. Israel has millions, and they might have like 80,000 or something around that. But it's still the highest number of any Middle Eastern country outside of Israel. And they bombed a synagogue on Passover. So, there's civilian deaths everywhere. That oil refinery in Tehran, again, civilian deaths everywhere. And that's what we sign up for when we partner with people like them. That Joe Kent, the head of counterterrorism, he resigned over this war because he said that the president was dragged into this war by the Israelis. They created a bubble around him with nothing but like an echo chamber from pro-Israeli Americans, Israeli diplomats, intelligence services, this, that. They just created a bubble around him and pushed everybody else out to just make it seem like he was just getting nothing but these, oh my God, Iran has a nuke, Iran's getting a nuke, Iran's getting a nuke. And he was fooled. Trump is a very vain person. And he believes the person who's the nicest to him. And Bibi and all the Israelis, the Mossad, all them, they are the best at manipulation. That is what they do. And honestly, I commend them for it, like how well they handle it. But they were able to push all these people out and convince him to do it. That's what the head of counterterrorism said. Even Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, all wrapped into one, little Marco. One day he actually came out and told the truth right after the war started. Trump could only launch the war if there was an imminent threat. That's what the War Powers Resolution says. So, to make one, Israel said that we are going to hit Iran tonight, with or without you. But that also meant that Iran would respond to us and Israel. And we have bases literally surrounding Iran. Pakistan, we have a bunch. Afghanistan, I think we still hold on to a couple there. All in the Gulf states, Iraq. We surrounded Iran with military bases. And those, obviously now, as we see, they're all destroyed. Most of them, anyway. Most of them are destroyed. We're probably not going back to those Gulf bases ever again. We're not rebuilding. We're not repairing. We're leaving them. That's how badly they were destroyed. So Israel knew that our soldiers and our bases would be put in harm's way. And they knew that if that happened, we would get dragged in, regardless if we wanted to or not. So they said, screw it. We're just going to go do it, and we're going to sacrifice the Americans for the greater good. And Rubio came out and said that. Yes, there was an imminent threat because the Israelis told us they were going to attack, and that imminent threat was going to come in the retaliatory attack against our bases. Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, said outright, I'm paraphrasing, but Israel dragged us into this war. And now you hear, there's sort of a revisionist history going on. I think it was the New York Times yesterday, where, J.D. Vance was, very skeptical of it. And Marco Rubio said it was going to be a bad idea and not going to be achievable. And Hegseth didn't want to do it. And these people and this. I don't give a fuck. They still went out there and carried water after. At a certain point, you sold your soul. I loved Tulsi Gabbard. I don't care about her anymore. She is going to go rot in hell with her sold soul. And she deserves it, along with all of them. They sold their souls for this war, and they deserve everything that's coming to them. All right? We'll end on that note. Have a good day.